There's an old familiar saying that applies pretty well to professional wrestling: size matters. But that's not always the case. Ask anybody who's been in the business long enough or has an eye for talent, and they'll tell you physical appearance is not the biggest factor to success in wrestling. But it don't hurt either. Bulging biceps, rippling quads, and washboard abs are all part of the wrestling package. It's been that way for decades. Some, more than others, are lauded for their physiques above anything else. But what about those who are able to transcend the stereotype of the overly ripped but under-talented musclehead, and who proved that they were as adept at the art of pro wrestling as they were at clangin' and bangin'? This week, I'm gonna rank them. My top 8 picks for the best body guys in wrestling history. Who do you think belongs on here? Let me know in the comment section, but for now, enjoy the countdown. Number 8, Batista. In an alternate timeline, being part of the Natural Born Thrillers could have been the career highlight for our next entry. Dave Batista's story began in the late 1990s when he tried out for WCW's Power Plant. Their head trainer Buddy Lee Parker told the big man that he would never be a star in wrestling. Considering some of the guys from there who did get pushed, maybe the Sarge didn't have the best instincts. But Bats pushed forward to pursue his dream, finally getting signed by the WWF in 2000 and sent to Ohio Valley Wrestling. Of all the future legends who came from Louisville during this time, it was Batista who probably had the body best suited to Vince McMahon's tastes. Considering where the business was at the time and where it was headed, Dave's physique was a throwback to the kind that almost went away after the steroid trial. I mean, those veins, man. Those gnarly, yet captivating veins. Ugh. After an unfortunate debut in 2002 as Reverend Devon's Deacon, Batista eventually got repackaged as Muscle for Triple H's hip new group Evolution along with Ric Flair and Randy Orton, and the rest, as they say, is history. Bad creative ended up favoring Batista as Randy Orton's botched face turn cleared the way for Dave being next in line to face Triple H in a much better storyline. To his credit, Hunter put Dave over huge in 3 consecutive main events, but soon after securing his place on top of the Raw Mountain, the Animal was moved into the 1B slot of the babyface hierarchy behind John Cena. The two champions traded shows, and Batista became a cornerstone of SmackDown for the latter half of the 2000s. Dave had an indelible charisma that made up for most of the shortcomings he may have had in the ring. It's worth mentioning how impressive it is that he became as successful as he did despite starting at a relatively late age. Then again, having a build like his can make one overlook such things. But what truly impressed me was the range he had as a character, especially in 2010 when he turned heel and went full douche. It was sort of novel to see him with the babyface shackles off for a change and portray himself as a smug, entitled bully.
This is not about you, this is about me being in the spotlight where I deserve to be.
While his 2 big returns to wrestling, both his comeback in 2014 that got cut short in favor of the Yes Movement, and his final match against Triple H 5 years later didn't exactly live up to the hype, Batista's rise to prominence wouldn't have been what it became were it not for his trademark physique that made people turn their heads. Number 7, Paul Orndorff. With the body of an ice sculpture and a look of meanness that could scare most fans away, Paul Orndorff's capacity for violence was made even more frightening by his impeccable appearance.
Never be like me no matter what happens. So don't get that in your mind. You'll never look like me.
After forging his skills in the major NWA territories, Orndorff surfaced in the WWF in late '83, flanked by Rowdy Roddy Piper, who, believe it or not, was initially intended to only be a manager until he got over so well they just had to put him in the ring. Orndorff and Piper were the classic heel pairing, a caustic combination of muscle and mouth. It led to them headlining the first WrestleMania, where they faced Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, with Orndorff taking the fall. Piper and Bob Orton Jr. put the blame on Paul for the loss, prompting him to turn face and befriend the Hulkster. But over the year-long course of their friendship, Orndorff felt increasingly frustrated by living in Hogan's shadow. Can you blame him? Hogan no-showed his own commercial shoot and Mr. Wonderful had to stand in for him.
An exercise poster and even Hawk's own workout tape.
Orndorff dramatically turned on Hogan in July of '86, which set off one of the hottest house show crowds in history at the big event in Toronto. What was expected to draw maybe 25,000 fans suddenly brought in more than 64,000 and the first $1 million gate in North American history. The success of the event gave Vince McMahon the confidence to book the Pontiac Silverdome for WrestleMania 3, an event that Paul ended up missing due to a neck injury. He worked through the injury to avoid missing big paydays, but in doing so, it led to the atrophy of the muscles in his right arm. After wrapping up his time in the Federation and even entering semi-retirement, Orndorff eventually found success in WCW during the 1990s, where he'd win the TV title before eventually retiring and becoming an agent and trainer at the power plant. Orndorff is undoubtedly one of the most important figures in the Federation's rise from regional territory to national phenomenon, but because he played second fiddle to Piper at the first WrestleMania and never got that big singles blow-off match with Hulk Hogan, he is woefully forgotten by many modern fans. But at least he holds the distinction for having the greatest theme in WCW history.
Wonderful, they call him Mr. Wonderful.
Number 6. Lex Luger. I've talked at length about the total package on this channel, and it seems that every time I look at him, my opinion about him changes. Sometimes I think he's crap, other times I think he's amazing. It all depends on the situation and whether he's face or heel and who he's working at any given time. But no matter the circumstance, one thing was true: Lex Luger was a freak of nature. Lex got off to a hot start in the Florida territory nearly 40 years ago and was almost immediately hyped as wrestling's next big star. He was often compared to Hulk Hogan, even though on his best day, the Hulkster's physique could never match that of Luger's. Luger got a taste of the Hogan treatment once he broke away from the Four Horsemen, but his career was somewhat stymied when he failed to win the big one from Ric Flair. Luger would eventually become a main eventer and continue to work for WCW until the early 90s, before pivoting to the WBF and eventually the World Wrestling Federation. As I've mentioned before, Luger had the unfortunate task of trying to fill Hulk Hogan's shoes as the top babyface, but a ham-fisted patriotic face turn and non-committal booking ended up being his downfall. In another timeline where Luger won the belt against Yokozuna at SummerSlam 1993, his time there would have been looked at much more favorably. Luger would finally get his big conquering hero moment in August of 1997 when he beat the dreaded Hollywood Hogan to take the WCW title away from the New World Order, only for him to lose it back to Hogan less than a week later. Luger wasn't always the best worker or the best talker, but whether he was a white meat babyface or an obnoxious, vain, and cowardly heel, he made you believe either way. Years of start-stop booking and enough face and heel turns to make the Big Show blush really hurt Lex in the long run, but his commitment to his body kept him employed for a very long time. When you think of the best wrestlers with the best physiques, it's hard not to include the total package on this list. Number 5. Hulk Hogan. Now, Hogan was never absurdly ripped, not like some of the others you'll see on this countdown, but when a good chunk of your gimmick revolves around your, well, hulkish physique, what you gonna do? Whether he was the Hulkster or even back to when he was Terry Boulder, size was always the man's selling point. His biggest points of pride were his back jack, along with those famous 24-inch pythons.
When I clap these 24-inch arms, the power of the python, submission is the only condition at which I will beat the giant.
After he turned babyface and became the center of the WWF universe, his physique was reappropriated into a beacon of sorts, an ideal, a physical manifestation of the training, the prayers, and the vitamins, the path to self-realization for all his little Hulkamaniacs to follow. Yea, praise be to the Hulkster. Whenever Hogan made a new friend or was getting ready for a big match, it was always centered around his intense fitness and nutrition regimen. Whether it was pumping iron for his showdowns with Andre the Giant or King Kong Bundy, training Mean Gene Okerlund, or nursing his buddy Hillbilly Jim back to health, the Hulkster was all about counting reps and managing macros. He even wanted to help the little maniacs with his patented home workout set with cassette tape.
Exercising just before you go to sleep sometimes causes you to stay awake longer than you would like. And exercising immediately after a meal is bad for your body.
Imagine the heartbreak when fans learned that Hogan's incredible body wasn't just the result of hard work and discipline, but with an assist from chemical agents. Hogan and his pythons helped lift the wrestling business to new heights in 2 different decades. In fact, for a while the state of the business was directly in proportion to his physique. Mythically proportioned Hulk from the 80s, business is booming. But once he's off the gas from 93 to 95, the frickin' dark ages. For years, Hogan was considered the gold standard, an ultimate combination of size, ability, and showmanship. But truthfully, Hogan wouldn't have been the man he was if not for this man. Number 4. Superstar Billy Graham. If Hulk Hogan is the great oak upon which the boom of wrestling bloomed, then superstar Billy Graham is the acorn. Originally a bodybuilder, Graham was one of the early pioneers of steroid use in professional wrestling, slowly changing the standard for wrestling physiques. Whereas men like the Crusher and the Bruiser represented an older style, Graham was seen as the future, perhaps a bit too ahead of his time. While Graham was far from the most dynamic worker in the ring, his charisma, physical presence, and incredible rap on the microphone more than made up for it.
In the greatest shape of my life, stronger, faster, better looking, not a scratch, not a blemish.
Graham set the Worldwide Wrestling Federation on fire in the late 1970s, shocking the world by beating Bruno Sammartino for the heavyweight title. He broke another mold by holding the belt for a whopping 10 months, unheard of for heel champions at the time. His career post-championship was somewhat of a mixed bag. We've spoken here before about his Karate Master gimmick, and his staunch stance against Vince McMahon in his later years seems to ebb and flow depending on which way the wind blew. And while Graham's overall career may not have been the greatest, it was certainly one of the most influential. The history of pro wrestling is lined with men who credit much of their success to the template set by Graham. Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Jesse Ventura, Austin Idol, and many more have had some of that superstar DNA in them. In fact, I don't think it's a coincidence that WWE refers to all their talent as superstars. If it weren't for this body guy, it's safe to say that wrestling as we know it could look very different today. Number 3. John Cena. Speaking of my feelings on Lex Luger as a performer earlier in this video, no one from the modern era has had to deal with as much whiplash from the fans as this man. John Cena's factory model physique is so picture perfect for wrestling that when he entered the business, his first gimmick was the prototype, literally a wrestling cyborg. After a strong main roster debut against Kurt Angle in June of 2002, Cena began to falter, and as the man himself has put it, it's entirely likely he was going to be released, just one of the many muscleheads chewed up and spat out by the business. But as the story goes, Stephanie McMahon hearing Cena freestyle a rap while on a tour bus was the spark needed to breathe new life into his career.
Besides open mics, one thing that gets me boiled is an old school 30-man battle royal.
The Doctor of Thugonomics gimmick was instant golden heat for the young man. Fans couldn't accept that a guy who looked like this was suddenly sporting throwback jerseys and dropping incendiary rhymes with a complete earnest belief in himself. But you know how it goes. If you're a cool heel, oftentimes you become a cool face. Fans were certainly ready to cheer for Cena once he beat JBL for the championship at WrestleMania 21, but then they got a bit more than they bargained for when the attempts at coming off cool soon turned into pandering. And well, that big push of his just didn't stop for the longest time. It's how those lol Cena wins and Super Cena memes came about in the first place. Cena's time on top led to the beginning of the most unique and divisive era in all of pro wrestling. It was like the USA-Canada feud of 1997, only instead of countries fighting, it was a war between genders and generations. But while older fans weren't exactly buying what Cena was selling, they did buy tickets for the privilege to boo him out of the building. Maybe rightfully so, Cena had a rep for being clunky and clumsy in the ring, especially in his earlier years. What he lacked in finesse, he more than compensated for with the ability to engage fans emotionally in his matches. And over time, even though fans may have hated his Hogan-esque booking, it was hard to deny that his in-ring work had gotten much better. Fast forward to 2024, and now whenever Cena shows up, it's a joy. He's perfectly happy working in Hollywood and is no longer overexposed in WWE. The boos and John Cena sucks chants replaced with genuine, unironic cheers. People have generally come to appreciate Cena's contributions to the business and see him as somewhat of an elder statesman. I guess if you live long enough, you truly see everything. Number 2. Ravishing Rick Rude. There are a few wrestlers with a look that screamed 1980s more than the ravishing one. With his thin yet chiseled build, the most impressive set of abs in wrestling until John Morrison came around, an anchor tattoo, a glorious permed mullet, and a manly mustache, Rude was like a ripped version of infamous adult film star John Holmes. Rude enjoyed a brief run with the NWA Tag Team titles with Manny Fernandez before leaving Jim Crockett Promotions to join the WWF in the spring of 1987. From the get-go, Rude's body was his main selling point, especially in the ramped-up environment of New York. There was definitely some truth in his claims that the men in the audience wanted to be like him and that the ladies wanted to be with him. Rude's body was constantly lauded by commentator Jesse Ventura, to the point where he even won the prestigious Jesse the Body Award at the '87 Slam Slammies.
You know, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my role model, Jesse the Body, for creating this award for me to win.
Rude's time in the Federation peaked during his recurring feuds with the Ultimate Warrior, once for the Intercontinental Championship and again for the WWF title. Rude left soon after SummerSlam 1990, and before long he was making waves again, only this time in WCW. Managed by Paulie Dangerously, Rude was a rare outlier for having a far better run in WCW than in the World Wrestling Federation. Over the course of 1992 and 93, Rick would have a mammoth run with the US title and would also hold the WCW International title, aka the Big Gold Belt, multiple times. Rude continued to wrestle until suffering a career-ending back injury during a match in Japan with Sting. Though his career did stop abruptly, and it's hard to imagine where he would have fit into the Hulk Hogan and Friends era of WCW that would arrive just a few months later, Rick Rude undoubtedly surpassed the constraints of his original gimmick to become perhaps the most effective heel of the early 90s. And I take back what I said about Orndorff. This guy had the best theme in WCW. Before I reveal my pick for the best body guy in wrestling's history, here are a few well-defined honorable mentions. Bruno Sammartino. Not exactly a body guy in the way that Billy Graham was a body guy, but Bruno was one of those types who lifted concrete barrels and did 1,000 squats before sunrise ever since he was a child, so it's no wonder he was built like a tank in his prime. Unlike the superstar, Bruno not only espoused the joys of fitness and exercise, but in doing so the natural way. Boring! Sid Vicious. Say what you want about Sid. The guy didn't become a main eventer and multiple-time world champion over the years for nothing. Regardless of where he sat on the heel babyface spectrum, he had an infectious intensity about him that made it almost impossible not to cheer for him, and a look that screamed pro wrestler more than almost anyone to ever step through the ropes. The Ultimate Warrior. Here's another guy that's been knocked plenty over the years, including right here on this channel. Nevertheless, the one thing about him you could never downplay was his commitment to having an unbelievable physique. The fierceness he brought to the ring was clearly mirrored in the gym, as UWs seemed to have veins popping out of his muscles, popping out of his veins. Scott Steiner. Along with some of those other names I mentioned in the Billy Graham entry, the Big Bad Booty Daddy owes a lot of his success as a singles wrestler to the superstar, but Scott Steiner was far from a knockoff. Rather, he was able to take the template and craft it into his own wild, insane image to take wrestling into the 2000s. And lest we forget, he's a hell of a mathematician. And my pick for the best body guy in wrestling history is Triple H. I know, some of you might disagree with me, but think about it. Physique, ability, charisma, and success both in and out of the ring? I almost hate to say it, but this makes the most sense. An avid fan of bodybuilding, Triple H was obsessed with fitness at an early age, so it's no surprise he got into wrestling with a good amount of muscle already on him. One would say he even looked reasonably proportioned during the old Jean-Paul Levesque or Hunter Hearst Helmsley days. But at some point in '98, the H-Man began adding a lot more muscle to his frame. One would think that the sledgehammer he started carrying the following year actually was some version of Thor's hammer for how large he was getting. Then came his big return from injury in 2002, and when I say big, I mean it, because he was as big as a house this time around. He was so jacked to the gills, it's amazing he didn't change his initials to HGH. Trips' body was such an integral part of his gimmick that anytime he fell below his own standards, he got washed for it. It's hard to believe that this version of the game and this version of the game existed within the same main event run, but you gotta give him credit for getting himself back into shape when he had to. His desire to come back looking better than ever after each sabbatical began to take its toll on him later in his career, as he seemingly got injured more and more every time he came back and was eventually forced into retirement due to a heart condition. The legacy he has left both in the ring and as a major force backstage is as impressive as it is polarizing. But even if he allegedly held back a lot of deserving talent as champion, or doesn't know how to address serious issues in a press conference today, it's impossible to deny that Triple H has been able to do what very few others in the business have done, both as a wrestler and as the guy with the pencil. And that's why he's my pick as the best body guy in wrestling history. But who else do you think belongs on the list? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.